CBS News polling reveals that Kamala Harris has changed the race for the White House. But what impact could she and Tim Walz have on down-ballot races? Well, no better person to answer that than Jessica Taylor, who is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report, and she joins us now. Jessica, always great to see you. So you have been looking at all of these races all year, but you can't imagine any more fluctuation than we've seen in the past couple of days.
Yeah.
For these down-ballot races, I mean, House and Senate are at stake. What kind of trends have you been seeing since this new ticket's been announced?
You know, what was interesting was even at Joe Biden's lowest after the debate, in the Senate, Democrats were managing to outrun Biden pretty significantly in swing states, in two of the most competitive states, Montana and Ohio, which they're going to need to. And, you know, because it's interesting to me because the past two election cycles, we've seen almost a complete erasure of ticket splitting. In 2016, every single Senate race went the same way as the presidential race did in the state. And in 2020, only in Maine, Republican Susan Collins managed to win her state even as Joe Biden won it. So I've been really struck by, you know, even at Joe Biden's lowest, that Democrats were still doing okay in most of these polls. And so we haven't seen a ton of data. We're starting to get some in since this switch happened at the top of the ticket. But with Harris running even stronger, Democrats are feeling even better about some of these races because the margin at which they might have to outperform the top of the ticket gets even smaller if Harris is doing better.
That's fascinating. And it's interesting to see, you know, Bob Casey was at the rally last night. Tammy Baldwin is going to be appearing with the ticket in Wisconsin at these stops. I'm curious, too, with the selection of Tim Walz as the vice presidential pick, there's a discussion about how much that kind of decision sways voters. But for down-ballot races, could you see any effect on that Walz could have?
You know, even before this switch happened, I was talking with Republicans, and they argued to me that if it was Harris, that she wouldn't play as well in the Midwest as Biden would, you know, because he's from Scranton. He has this sort of blue-collar appeal, you know, that Harris was this, you know, San Francisco liberal. Bringing someone like Walz onto the ticket, who's this, you know, Midwestern, even if he's not from one of those states, I think we saw his reception in Wisconsin today. We're seeing crowds in Michigan. I think he has that appeal in that way. So you see that these senators who were once more reticent to appear with Biden, like Tammy Baldwin, I think Biden's last visit there, she was not there. When Harris has been there, she has been there. So you're seeing, I think, Democrats always feared that it was the apathy that was going to get them. And, you know, even when I mentioned these polling numbers were still okay, Democrats still feared that if they went through more weeks of questions about Biden's age and his fitness for office, that the bottom would drop out. And that would be because their voters weren't going to show up, that they wouldn't be energized. Now you are not seeing that as a problem.
Interesting. And I mean, if we could take a step back and kind of look at the Senate map. I mean, we mentioned Wisconsin, we mentioned Pennsylvania. What does the map look like if Democrats want to take over the Senate? I mean, you also kind of consider Joe Manchin's retirement. West Virginia seems pretty much gone for them.
Yeah, while these polls are encouraging, we should not shy away from the fact that this is a very tenuous majority that Democrats have. They have a 51-49 majority. You mentioned the West Virginia seat. That one is going to go into Republican hands. So we essentially start at 50-50. That means that Democrats have to defend every single incumbent. Talking about these swing states, they're looking okay there, but it's John Tester in Montana, where Trump won that state by 16. That's a place where does Harris help or hurt, or does she have an impact? He sort of has to run his own race. He also has not endorsed Harris yet, so I think he's trying, you know, he was trying to prove his independence from Biden, I think still from the Biden administration, because he might have to outrun even Harris by as much as 20 points. Sherrod Brown as well, that's a state that Trump won by 8 points. But we've seen recent polling where Harris is behind, Trump is winning that state by 10 points, but Brown is still up 4 points. But those states are just the most perilous, really. So Democrats have to pitch a perfect game. They have to win every single one of these races. And even still, that gets them to 50-50. So they still have to win the White House in order to keep control.
Right, and to be able to govern, essentially. Pennsylvania obviously was in the spotlight last night. It was very telling that that's where they chose to essentially launch this new ticket. We're going to speak to Senator Bob Casey later on in this hour. Tell us about that race specifically, because Pennsylvania is a must-win for whoever wants to become president.
Yeah, this is actually the state that Democrats flipped an open seat last cycle, which was really unexpected. Casey has been there in the Senate since 2006. He has a famous name in the state. His father was governor. He's running against Republican Dave McCormick, who ran last cycle, lost in the primary to Dr. Oz. Very close race. McCormick is a much stronger candidate. They're still hitting him over some of his out-of-state ties. He still owns a house in Connecticut over ties. He was a hedge fund executive over ties to his business in China. And this is a place where Casey needs that turnout. He needs that type of energy that you saw last night. You know, I was talking with people in the most recent days because, of course, Governor Josh Shapiro was the runner-up. That they were very much worried about what Shapiro would do if he were on the ticket. But you saw that type of energy last night. You know, polls that we show, Casey still has a small single-digit lead, but he has consistently been ahead. McCormick is sort of running behind Trump's numbers. You know, I think a lot of voters, they're not as attuned to these Senate races yet. And so you have these Republicans that are running behind Trump. If they can match him, then those races become tighter. But right now, we do see voters differentiating between their vote for president and their vote for Senate.
Yeah, and Donald Trump will be on the campaign trail in Montana later this weekend, campaigning for the Senate race there. Always good to see you and
too,
break
Caitlin.
these races down. I know a lot could change between now and then, so we will keep talking to you. Jessica Taylor, thank you so much. And coming up,